everyone. Thank you once again to the organizers for inviting me today to deliver a lecture for the lecture series of the World Muslim Communities Council. It is indeed a privilege for me to be part of this initiative. My name is Khairuddin Al-Junaid, and I am currently a professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History at the University of Brunei Darussalam. At the same time, I am also a senior fellow at Georgetown University, the United States of America. What I want to do today is basically to review the studies of Islam in Southeast Asia, an ummah that is somehow neglected in many of the studies of Islam in the world today. The title of my lecture today is A Misunderstood Civilization, Islam in Southeast Asia Reconsidered. Why I use this title, as I will show later on, Islam in Southeast Asia has not been appreciated enough. And even if there have been many studies of Islam in Southeast Asia, the many studies that we see about Islam in Southeast Asia suffer from some problems. Scholars have tried to resolve some of these problems and point to new ways at looking at Islam in Southeast Asia. What I will do today is to try and review some of these efforts to try and bring about a better understanding of Islam in the region. And then I would point to future directions that scholars, both Muslims and non-Muslims, could consider in the study of Islam, not only in Southeast Asia, but in the world today. As I'm presenting many of these studies of Islam in Southeast Asia, I would like to also showcase some of my works dealing with the topic. I hope that through this presentation, I would attract more attention from scholars all over the world to consider the study of Islam in Southeast Asia with new perspectives, methodologies, theories, and concepts. I would like to begin by mentioning that myself and 24 other established and upcoming scholars of Islam in Southeast Asia have put together a volume entitled The Routledge Handbook of Islam in Southeast Asia. This is a project that began in 2018 at Georgetown University. I was appointed as the Malaysian chair of Islam in Southeast Asia and took the time to bring together these scholars to consider new ways at looking at Islam in the region. This handbook is very much handy for scholars who are interested in the region. It is meant not only for scholars and students in the universities, but it is helpful for policymakers and analysts in their attempts to make sense of what has happened in the region and some of the directions that Islam and Muslims in Southeast Asia are headed into. Let me begin by mentioning that it is only apt to call Islam in Southeast Asia as a civilization because it has maintained its presence for more than a millennium. And scholars such as Osman Bakar and Anthony Milner have now brought our attention to referring to Islam in Southeast Asia as a civilization of its own, a unique civilization with certain characteristics that are shared with Islam elsewhere in the world, but it is also at the same time defined by the customs and cultures that are predominant in the region. Osman Bakar's Islamic Civilization and the Modern World is a really good volume that brings together many of his past works and recent ones. Osman Bakar makes the argument that we must seriously consider the study of Southeast Asian Islamic civilization as against the changes that this part of the world has experienced as it encounters the modern world. And the same is it with Anthony Milner. What he has done in his book is to trace the career of the concept of Malayness and show that even though the idea of being Malay has changed through the passage of time, what is clear is that Malays that form the majority of the region, the majority of what has been called as the Malay world, or now referred to as islands of Southeast Asia, could be considered as having a civilization of their own. I would like to first enter into the discussion by talking about how Islam has been portrayed. And here, I would like to ask the basic question, who speaks for Islam in Southeast Asia. I will try to bring your attention to the issue of news coverage of Islam in Southeast Asia and how some of the things that you see, be it in the internet or in the mainstream news, they obscure our understanding of Islam in the region. And scholars have tried to recover the voices of Muslims in Southeast Asia and bring to light the problems of Islamophobia, of the fear of Islam in the study of Islam in the region. And then I will review some of the dominant approaches by scholars on Islam in the region. Here, I will look at methodological nationalism, diffusionism, and Muslim centrism. All of these dominant approaches do not help us to really fully appreciate Islam in the region, and I will critique these approaches as against the recent innovations. So in the third part of my lecture, I will highlight some of the new studies of Islam in Southeast Asia that pays emphasis on cosmopolitan tendencies and entwined mobilities, how people in the region are generally very cosmopolitan, and that this cosmopolitanism has always been defined or has been defined by the entwined mobilities that have and are still taking place. Last but not least, I will end with some future directions that scholars could consider in the study of Islam in Southeast Asia. Here, I want to talk about the concept of networked Islam and religious convivialism, an aspect of Islam in the region that ought to be given more prominence. Let us begin with the whole issue of who speaks for Islam in Southeast Asia and what the news recovers and what scholars sought to recover. Now, if you look at many of the items that we can see on Islam in Southeast Asia, especially when we do a simple Google search, what comes out from Google, and some people will call it Sheikh Google, when we type Islam plus Southeast Asia, are these sorts of news. So if you look at the very top, the politics of intolerance and discrimination. The second would be the influence of ideologies and how ideologies are coming into the region. And last, we look at how the Taliban, in them taking over Afghanistan, might influence radical Muslims in Southeast Asia. A lot of the things that you see on the internet on Islam in Southeast Asia point to an alarmist picture of Islam in the region. And of course, when you try to go through Yahoo, the same kind of results will come out. The first is basically on mass vaccination. And then when you go down, you hear issues of exodus bans, blasphemy laws, protests, and so forth and so forth. So I would challenge you to try and give it a shot to type Islam plus Southeast Asia in any internet search engines. The results are really going to be the same. And what the news covers when it comes to Islam in Southeast Asia are always the negative aspects of Islam in the region. And we can actually extrapolate this and see this happening when it comes to Islam globally. Why is this happening? Tamara Son, a colleague of mine who has recently retired, mentioned in her recent book that this has to do with the surging Islamophobia that has become more and more powerful than ever before with the forces of the internet, with the digital media, and so forth. She says the demonization of Islam in the public sphere has returned with a vengeance and taken on a new populist character. Just as we imagine that people may be more appreciative of world religions, the internet and the digital media has made misunderstandings and negative portrayals of Islam in the region to be more powerful and more pervasive than ever before. Now, that is not all. When you look at the studies of Islam generally, the world over, you see the problem of disproportionality. And this is a big problem because in the study of Islam in the region, much of the world's attention are focused on the Middle East. It is as if that when we talk about Islam in the region, it is all about the Arabs and the North Africans. Now, more and more studies are pointing towards Islam in Europe, and usually about the problem of Muslims in Europe. A little bit of coverage on sub-Saharan Africa, but very little attention has been given to Islam in Southeast Asia, when the fact is the majority of Muslims in the world today are actually based in the Asia Pacific. 1/3 of the entire Muslim population in the world today are actually based in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the home of the largest Islamic, Indonesia is basically the largest Islamic nation in the world today. But when we look at the study of global Islam, Islam in Southeast Asia has always been seen as the periphery, and the centers of Islam has not only been the Middle East and North Africa, but a lot of the attention now is focused on Islam in Europe and in North America. So what I want to do as a start is to reorient our minds to looking at Islam in Southeast Asia and in the Asia Pacific as equally important as the Islam that we see in other parts of the world. We need to remove from our minds, from our analysis, from our writings, this problem of disproportionality, to pay attention to other civilizations within the larger Islamic civilization that has constructed their own cultures and customs. Let me now move on to the whole issue of dominant approaches of Islam in Southeast Asia. Not only do Islam in Southeast Asia suffer from the problem of disproportionality, of which it is not given enough attention to, we have a problem of Islam in Southeast Asia being studied from the perspective of methodological nationalism, diffusionism, and Muslim centrism. What is methodological nationalism? Methodological nationalism is basically the tendencies of scholars to assume that the nation state is the natural, social, and political form of the modern world. In this way of studying Islam in Southeast Asia, a lot of attention is given to studying nations. So many of the studies that you see today are always looking at Islam in Indonesia, Islam in Malaysia, or what they term as Malaysian Islam, Bruneian Islam, Indonesian Islam, and so forth and so forth. And this is even seen in works such as the one by Greg Feely and Virginia Hooker, even though the title of the book is Voices of Islam in Southeast Asia. When we go through the chapters, they deal basically with different countries. And what has happened is that they construct containers around Islam in different countries, such that the links and networks that flow across different countries are not paid attention to. And the same is it with this book called Islamic Thought in Southeast Asia, although the title seems to suggest that it is looking at the whole region. The chapters will look at different countries. So methodological nationalism has affected how we study Islam in Southeast Asia, but I would say Islam in general. Whenever we look at a lot of studies of Islam today, they are focused on Egyptian Islam, Iranian Islam, Syrian Islam, and so forth and so forth. And the idea that we need to look at Islam from the perspective of nations is a recent idea. And what it does is to push away these various linkages that have taken place, be it in the Arab world, and especially in Southeast Asia, with the Arab world, and so forth. The second problem that we see in the study of Islam in Southeast Asia is the whole notion of diffusionism. What is diffusionism? Diffusionism has it that the authentic and original Islam could only be found in the Arab world. And all other Islam all over the world are but watered down versions of Islam. And this has structured how scholars study Islam in Southeast Asia. A lot of emphasis has been given to how Muslims in the region are susceptible to various influences from the outside, and that Muslims in the region, basically, especially in Southeast Asia, do not have their own authentic version of Islam. So you have works such as this, the Talibanization of Islam or the Talibanization of Southeast Asia, almost suggesting that Muslims in Southeast Asia are not able to construct an Islam of their own, and because they are more open to things that are coming from the outside and do not have an identity of their own, they become influenced by all of these forces coming, be it from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from the Arab world. So diffusionism has it that Islam in Southeast Asia do not have its own authentic feature. Islam in Southeast Asia is but an artificial version of Islam, and because of it, Islam in the region is always taking on different forms of Islam to make sense of its own identity. The third problem in the current literature on Islam in Southeast Asia is the problem of Muslim centrism. And here, a lot of studies of Islam in the region downplay the agency of non-Muslims, or at least they neglect the agency of these non-Muslims in the structuring of Islam in the region. In many of these works, a lot of attention has been given to the role of Muslims in structuring Islam in Southeast Asia. Now, the reality is that non-Muslims also play a big role in the making and remaking of Islam in the region. The book by a friend of mine, Howard Phillips-Fell, suggests this in Sultans, Summons and Scenes, Islam and Muslims in Southeast Asia. You see an attempt to depict the story of Islam in Southeast Asia purely from the perspective of Muslims themselves. I argue that it is not wrong to look at Islam in Southeast Asia or anywhere else from the perspective of Muslims per se, but when we commit the error of Muslim centrism, of which we only look at it from the Muslim angle of vision, we lose sight of the fact that non-Muslims have worked together with Muslims to construct their own unique civilization. So diffusionism, Muslim centrism, and methodological nationalism has been some of the ways by which scholars of Islam in the region has looked at how Islam in the region evolved through time. Now, the problem with all of these approaches of Islam in Southeast Asia is that they all suffer from this Arabistic bias. What is this Arabistic bias? Marshall Hodgson, a great scholar of global Islam, mentioned that the Arabistic bias has it that there is a unidirectional view of Islamic history. That Islam came from the Arab world, and then a lot of the cultures that was from the Arab world traveled into different parts of the world. And this has been the case again and again through Islamic history. There is only a one-way traffic of influences, of ideas, of different ways of looking at Islam. And that from this assumption, all other ways of looking at Islam in different parts of the world are but imitations of the Arabic version of Islam. And Marshall Hodgson argues against this. He said that while Islam came from the Arab world, or did came from the Arab world, when it traveled into different parts of the world, Islam then manifests its very unique and particularistic character in different parts of the world. This bias is something that we need to pay attention to, because this bias assumes that only by looking at Islam through the lens of the Arabs could we actually appreciate Islam in its fullest sense. And this has been proven to be not accurate. There have been many recent innovations that are challenging this problem of methodological nationalism, diffusionism, and also Muslim centrism. And here I want to look at works that focuses on cosmopolitan tendencies and entwined mobilities. A lot of scholars of Islam in Southeast Asia now are looking at the various cosmopolitan tendencies that have been there in Southeast Asia. Look at this picture as a case in point. This, you may imagine that this is a temple in some part of China, but that is not the case. This is actually a mosque. It is called Masjid Beijing at the state of Kelantan in Malaysia. Now, this is not the only Chinese temple-looking mosque in Southeast Asia. There are many of such mosques in different parts of Southeast Asia, be it in Indonesia and South Thailand and so forth and so forth. The point here is that even in the so-called conservative state of Kelantan, there has been a celebration of different ways of manifesting Islam. Even though Kelantan is a predominantly Malay nation, it has been open enough to accept that Chinese styles of looking at Islam and manifesting Islam ought to be celebrated as well. So within these cosmopolitan tendencies, scholars have looked at the kind of ideas that have been produced by the intellectuals in Southeast Asia. And here I call this grounded intellectualism, intellectuals that do not only think philosophically, but they think about issues that are grounded in the realities of Southeast Asia. And scholars have also paid attention to the everyday embodiment of Islam in the region. Some of the works that I could mention here is the one by Sulin Lewis, who looks at cities in motion. And here she paid attention to the various cities across Southeast Asia that manifest this cosmopolitanism and how Muslims and non-Muslims have been a contributive part of this cosmopolitanism. My own works entitled Muslim Cosmopolitanism, Southeast Asian Islam in Comparative Perspective, and HAMKA and Islam, Cosmopolitan Reform in the Malay World too, try to show that there has always been these cosmopolitan tendencies that are there in Southeast Asia. And that these cosmopolitan tendencies are not only seen in the marketplaces, in the shopping centers, in interactions between Muslims and non-Muslims at everyday life basis. We can also see it in the ideas of some key intellectuals. In HAMKA and Islam, I looked at the idea of this famous scholar called Haji Abdul Malik bin Abdul Karim Amrullah, also known as HAMKA, how he had drawn from different ideas, be it within the Muslim and non-Muslim tradition, to try and reform his society. And his society was not only Indonesia, but the Malay world as a whole. I call his project of reform cosmopolitan reform. The second strand of innovations that we can see now is the strand that emphasizes on the issue of entwined mobilities. And here, scholars looked at how Muslims and non-Muslims travel all across Southeast Asia and beyond to share their ideas. And they are looking at these ideas as they travel across the inter-Southeast Asian context. And here, many of the scholars are looking at the interchange between Muslims and non-Muslims of the things that they think about at an everyday basis. The works by Megan Brankley Abbas, Who's Islam, the Western University and Modern Islamic Thought in Indonesia, looks at the traveling of ideas from the West into Indonesia and how this traveling of ideas gave rise to new ideas in Southeast Asia that was exported back to the West. So this interchange between non-Muslims studying Islam and Indonesians who are studying Islam have now traveled into this part of the world and back. And of course, the interesting part about Megan Abbas' study is that you can apply it to Islam all over the region. A lot of the Muslims in Brunei, in Malaysia, in Philippines, in southern Thailand, in other parts of the Southeast Asia are also studying right now in Western universities. The things that they have studied in Western universities have now traveled into the region and changing the ways in which Muslims in the region looked at their Islam. Eng Seng Ho and Abdul Sharif also looked at the traveling of ideas, of things, of peoples across the Indian Ocean. And this is very interesting because what they have done is to show that this entwined mobilities is not something that is new. It has been there in the history of Southeast Asia for many, many hundred years. And this is especially so when we look at the internet today. If you look at this very interesting diagram, you can see that the highest internet penetration is currently in Asia, and Southeast Asia has amongst the third highest internet penetration all over the world today. This high internet penetration, or the users of the internet, tells us that there exists a lot of interactions that is going on between Muslims and non-Muslims. And this shows that the entwined mobilities that I'm talking about just now do not only exist in the real world, as shown by Eng Seng, Sharif, and Magan Abbas, but it's also happening in the virtual world as well. The Rohingya crisis that you see today show that there's a lot of these mobilities that is going on. The crisis now involves Muslims who have to move from one part of Southeast Asia to another, some in Aceh, others in Malaysia. There's this mobility of people going, even though the majority of the Rohingya are Muslims. Their movement from one place to another involves non-Muslims as well. And this is very, very interesting. Georgetown University pays a lot of attention to this crisis and to the mobilities that are happening. And what they are trying to show there is that the Rohingya crisis is not only a Muslim crisis, but it involves the interaction and agency of non-Muslims as well. Now, a lot of these debates and coverage are now in the internet. Muslims and non-Muslims are paying attention to this issue to find constructive ways to deal with the crisis. I would like to move on now to future directions, which I would like to propose for scholars of Islam in Southeast Asia to look at. And here I want to look at two areas: network Islam and religious convivialism. Now we need to realize that the world that we are in today, as the sociologist Manuel Castells have mentioned, and as I was mentioning just now, is a world that is characterized by the spread of informational technology. All of us are now exposed to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and others. Following Manuel Castells' theory, the network society that has now become so powerful will continue to progress and to develop. So more and more apps, more and more ways of communications in the virtual world will be developed through time. And we are basically in an era of intense connectivity and exchanges. What is happening right now, as Manuel Castells predicted 20 years ago, is a world of uncontrolled and confusing change, which compelled people to regroup around primary identities, religious, ethnic, territorial, and national. Now, Manuel Castells is somewhat right to say that people are getting more and more enclosed or enclaved as they are exposed to the internet. I would like to argue, while there is a segment of people who are getting more and more closed up, more and more parochial because of their exposure to the internet, there also exists another segment who are getting more and more cosmopolitan, more and more open, and more interactional and relational with one another. And you can see this actually when you talk about Islam in the region. We see now an era of a networked Islam, where Muslims are now binded together with non-Muslims in ways that are more powerful than ever before. And we need to pay attention to this networked Islam. This is the picture of Mahir Zain, whose songs are not only heard by Muslims, but are also enjoyed by non-Muslims. There exist now local, regional, and global connectivities that bind us through people or through artists such as Mahir Zain. And here, these connectivities are not only seen when we look at Hajj, hip-hop, or halal consumption. We see it happening in many aspects of life. So Hajj, hip-hop, and halal consumption are some of the global connectivities that are happening today. And of course, a lot of these preachers are traveling to different parts of the world. Ustazah Yasmin Mugahid from America is now a very much loved figure in Malaysia. And she's not only moving across Southeast Asia, but also to the rest of Asia, showing that Islam in the region is getting more involved in the making of a networked Islam. So we need to pay attention to this network Islam, because it shows that Islam in the region cannot be studied only as a localized phenomenon, but that it is a phenomenon that is constantly interacting with the region, with the globe, and influencing as much as it is being influenced by forces from the outside and by different developments in the inside. Two works by Kamaluddin Nasir, who looks at the hip-hop culture, and Eric Talacozo, who looks at the Hajj, are some of the works that we need to pay attention to, because what they are doing is to show two dimensions of Islam that are getting more and more networked. The first dimension is the kind of Islam that is expressed by the youth. The younger generation now are getting more and more connected than ever before. But not to be forgotten are people who are older, who engage in the journeys of faith called the Hajj. Of course, the Hajj is not only a journey for the old. The point being here is that this pilgrimage to Mecca keeps Muslims in Southeast Asia connected to not only Mecca, but also to different parts of the world more today than ever before. And this is a long-standing journey that's always been there, and a journey that has made networked Islam more and more apparent than it was many, many centuries ago. Last but not least, I would like to recommend that scholars look at what I call as religious convivialism. And here, the emphasis is on Southeast Asia as a terrain by which the dialogue between civilizations are taking place. This has not been given a lot of attention to. Many of the works that we have before do not show that Islam is but one of the religions that emphasize on different religions coming together, engaging in interactions and dialogue with one another. I call this religious convivialism, taking from the convivencia that was developed during the time of the Islamic Spain. Convivencia basically means Muslims, Christians, and Jews coming together. But now scholars are saying that we need to revive this spirit in the world that we are in today. Recently, 300 intellectuals from 33 countries came together to publish what has been called as the Second Convivialist Manifesto towards a post-neoliberal world. What they tried to do in this manifesto is to come up with a broad-based humanist, civic, and political philosophy that would somehow be the ways in which we can sustain the art of living together in the 21st century. I am saying that the Convivialist Manifesto should also include religions. They do mention religions in the manifesto, but do not see religion as the key antidote to the world problem. My point is that we need to look at Islam, Christianity, and other religions as a way to bring together people from different faiths, from different cultures, from different backgrounds, to have a dialogue with one another. So religious convivialism is about basically dialogues between civilizations that are rooted in their religious philosophies. Two works that I could mention here that have already looked into this aspect, the religious conviviality. The first is by an edited book by Huma Ahmad Ghosh, who looked at Asian Muslim women, globalization and local realities. Another amazing book by Shirin Edwin, The Space of the Transnational, look at how this conviviality, religious conviviality, has already been taking place in the writings of Southeast Asian women and also the writings of Africans as well. My own work, Islam in Malaysia, an entwined history, and Shapers of Islam in Southeast Asia, have also pointed towards that direction. In Islam in Malaysia, I challenge the methodological nationalism by reconceptualizing the whole idea of what Malaysia is. I say that we can only understand what Malaysia is by looking at how Muslims and non-Muslims have been entwined with one another, and that they have always been in dialogue with one another. Shapers of Islam in Southeast Asia, which will be published this year, looks at the ideas of 7 key intellectuals and how they try to rethink the whole notion of Islam and Islamic reform to try and draw from different cultures all over the world to come up with a new interpretation of Islam. Now, I would like to end by proposing that we need to look seriously into this whole issue of religious convivialism and how Muslim and non-Muslim dynamics and dialogues in the making of civilizations could be looked into more seriously. It can be a collaborative project that the council can consider. And with this, I would like to basically end my my lecture by saying that we need to pay more attention to Islam in Southeast Asia as a subject of study. Islam in Southeast Asia has generally been neglected in many of the works of Islam globally. A lot of studies have been done on Islam in Southeast Asia, but these studies suffer from a lot of problems which scholars ought to try and remedy. Myself and many of the established and young scholars that you see today are now pointing to new ways of looking at Islam in the region. If there's one thing that I would like the audience to take away from this lecture, it is that I hope and I would like to invite all of you to study Islam in the region as a way for us to understand the Islamic civilization as a whole. Thank you.